Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we're going to explore the implications of astrology for theoretical science. I'm pleased to be with Arthur Young, born in 1905, inventor of the Bell helicopter, a cosmologist and author of The Reflexive Universe and the Geometry of Meaning, and founder of the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in Berkeley, California. Welcome, Arthur.
Good to see you.
It's good to be with you too. Arthur, why do you think that scientists would benefit from thinking more seriously about astrology?
Well, I think it's for the same reason I've benefited. Let me go back a bit and the helicopter. One of the most important things that I caught on to at the beginning, and it saved me a lot of time, was the fact that as the rotor goes around, if you want to go in that direction, you have to twist the blade when it's at right angles. In other words, the control has to anticipate the force by 90 degrees. That gave me a clue to the mind-body problem. I was struggling with it for years, trying to think what was the relation between mind and body, and then thinking of it as the control versus the force. You see, the control force here on the blade can be just a few ounces, but that influences 2,000 pounds of push. So that's a mind-body relation. Mm-hmm. Then I found that relationship in the signs of the Zodiac of astrology.
An angular relationship.
An angular relation, and it really has the name control. It's the third derivative, the one that Newton didn't step into.
The third derivative of what, Arthur?
Well, when you drive a car, you're in a position. That's the first thing. It's not a derivative, it's the thing you're driving. Then position. You change the position with respect to time, that's the velocity. Newton was the one to name that entity and give it scientific status. And then you can change the velocity, that's called acceleration.
That would be the second derivative.
The second derivative. But what Newton didn't say, or no one seems to mention, is that there's a third derivative. That's when you push the accelerator or put your foot on the brake, you're controlling the car by controlling the acceleration.
Mm-hmm. So you've developed these various derivatives. They were necessary to you in
right. Well,
working with the helicopter.
The Zodiac, the signs of the Zodiac were giving me the clue to that structuring of the derivatives. Mm-hmm. And from that, I was able to put all the measure formula into this circle of the Zodiac, and they came on the signs in the appropriate places. They had the same meaning. The measure formula of physics, for instance, work, was the sign Virgo, which is the sign of work, and the opposite one was Pisces, the sign of belief. It's inertia. It's that which carries you when you don't have anything to back you up. Mm-hmm. Inertia is the tendency of a thing to stay in a given state of rest or motion, according to Newton. And that's what faith is, you see. Faith is the appropriate description of that sign.
Of inertia.
Of Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in any case, that's the Zodiac. That wasn't what we're going to talk about today, but it's necessary first step.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we leave that subject, though, I should mention for our viewers that this work, of course, is covered in your book, The Geometry of Meaning.
Yes.
And
the geometry of meaning, I based it on the fact that the Egyptians said that all meaning is an angle. I've been trying to find out more about that, and every Egyptian I ask can only tell me, yes, that's true, but he can't give me any more details.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been pursuing those myself, and that's what's in that book.
Mm-hmm. So what you've looked at is a fundamental way in which the very basic measure formula of physics, based
Right.
on first principles of position, velocity, speed, can be viewed as angular relationships
Right.
in a way that we might say is parallel to or isomorphic with the symbolism of astrology.
Just to put it very simply, you remember the Solomon's wives. The two women wanted the same baby. And Solomon said, well, I'll cut the baby in two and give you each half. And one of them said, okay with me. And the true mother said, oh no, I rather she had the baby. So then Solomon knew which was the true mother. Mm-hmm. In other words, any opposition has a mediating axis. In this case, the first one was possession. They both wanted to possess the baby, but the mediating axis was love, and it was independent axis. So that enabled him to perceive the true mother. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean by geometry of meaning. These angles between things show you what mediates something else.
Mm-hmm. What we seem to be getting at here is an understanding of the underlying depth of astrology in a way that seems to address some of the most fundamental distinctions that we make in our daily lives.
Well, it's a very old and very comprehensive view of what? Well, it's a view of the whole of things, whereas science has proceeded very well and very successfully along a line where they look for things that obey laws. They have to neglect things that don't obey laws. Now, this gives them a one-sided view of the universe. It's like a sort of policeman's view of things. He's interested in any violation of laws. He's not interested in the things that are going peacefully. So science is getting us an overemphasis on what would be called determinism. Laws tell you what's going to happen.
It's as if astrology is a larger, more comprehensive, holistic system within which science fits. And as such, science may gain some insights about itself from...
Especially when it goes into cosmology.
Mm-hmm.
You see, for instance, talking about evolution, now wait, I must go back. Science, the basic postulate is that it's objective.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to stick to things that are objects, like particles, that behave according to laws. Then they get to a problem like that of evolution. So what does evolution due to? Due to chance, according to the best authorities. But what's objective about chance? You can puzzle yourself with that, answering that question. I won't try to answer it now. I just think it's not objective.
Well, I suppose, other than a mathematical definition, we don't really quite know what randomness is.
Well, randomness, if it's anything, it's not according to law. So you have to be able to deal with things that don't behave according to law. Now that's been going on for quite some time in science now, and instead of laws, they have probabilities. Now, so we need to distinguish the area where the probabilities apply and the area where laws apply. I like to think of trying to get certainty in machinery. You want the machinery to work, the car has to be determined, but that doesn't mean you're determined. Mm-hmm. But you are in the universe too. So there's something in the universe that doesn't obey laws. Mm-hmm. I like to put it that the machinery is there for you to use. Mm-hmm. And the laws of nature are there for all life to use, not just you.
So there's a sense from an astrological perspective of realms in which laws apply and realms in which they don't.
Yes.
And which is almost the opposite of science, because scientists often implicitly assume that these laws apply everywhere.
They hope to have the perfect formula that will explain everything. But if you could explain everything, what would be the point of having a universe?
And well, isn't this a fundamental philosophical question?
Well, that's why I think philosophy needs to step in and help and answer these questions. But let me develop this difference between I mentioned that everything according to law. Well, that's under the planet Saturn. Saturn is also supposed to be Old Father Time. But in the Greek myth of chronos, which is Greek for Saturn, and it's the root of chronometer, other things dealing with time, Saturn, or Chronos, ate his own children. What does that mean? It means things born in time die in time. Things have a finite life. And things have to obey this law. And in the myth, Rhea, the wife of Chronos, doesn't like this rule that he's going to eat his own children. So to let Zeus escape, she wraps a stone in swaddling clothes and feeds it to Chronos, who eats the stone, enables Zeus to escape. Now this, to me, is a very subtle way of describing what the inventor does. He recognizes there is the law and does the necessary thing to obey the law, but then he is able to use the law for that. By knowing the law, he can use it. That's what this whole law business is for. It's so that life can use these laws, and you get plants are the first things to use the laws of chemistry to regulate their metabolism, so they grow up. And things that aren't live don't go uphill.
So it seems to me as if we're coming right around again to your original discussion of how you understood the principle of control in the helicopter involving the 90-degree
that was
angle.
The key to the whole thing, to recognize that there was a third derivative, something that could use law, so you don't have to say everything is, well, of course you can't say everything is determined because you don't know how to find where a thing is even now to predict it. But it could be an ideal. You would say, I hope to find, and I will predict. But now that doesn't apply to everything. It only applies to the to the things that are going to use the law.
Now you seem to be getting at a fundamental paradox in science itself, because it doesn't allow purpose. It doesn't allow what we call teleology.
Well, that's the funny thing. You would think technology to be inferior to science, theoretical science. But theoretical science is stuck in this theory that everything is determined, whereas technology goes ahead and makes all kinds of things that you control. In fact, if they made an automobile you couldn't control, you wouldn't buy it. Everything you get has some kind of control on it. You can use that to cook the toast or do whatever you want to do, but you're able to control, use the laws to get what you want. Now, the realm of law is under Saturn. Now, I can't talk about what's beyond Saturn. That's where life comes in, because science doesn't have any theory about life that I think deserves to be called a theory. I could talk about chance, but I'd rather go back to nuclear physics, where a whole new realm has opened up. This is the realm of probability. They can't predict when an atom will radiate or when a carbon-14 will change, or any of these things can't be predicted in a precise way. So they use probabilities, which is like insurance tables. The insurance company can say what percentage of people will die before they're 86 or something like that, but they can't tell what happens to individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But they're perfectly happy with probability, and they're liable to say we have exact probability about this and that.
It
But
almost is a paradox, isn't it?
Yes,
Exact probability.
Because when you have a probability, it's because you don't have a law. It's not the same as a law.
Mm-hmm. So it would seem as if in this realm where we're using statistics and probabilities, we don't have the same kind of control that you might have over a baseball or an automobile.
Well, you're still looking for control, but you manage to use billions and billions, like in a steam engine or a gasoline engine. There are billions of gasoline molecules in that cylinder, and you don't care what the individuals do. You're interested in what the whole cylinder will do, and that way you get by and you're able to make the engine.
Mm-hmm.
But still, you're using entirely different approach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called, the major thing used by the nuclear physicist is the Greek letter psi. It's like a pitchfork.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually the trident of Neptune. Remember the trident?
Yes.
And Neptune was the god of the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how they happened to name Neptune by that, but it was the most appropriate name to name it after the god of the sea.
The planet Neptune.
The planet Neptune.
Yes.
Well, do you know what psi is, that Greek letter?
Well, in physics, the letter psi, doesn't it refer to the probability function that
Right.
underlies the...
But before it was that, what was it?
Well, psi also is used by parapsychologists to refer to psychic phenomenon, the phenomenon of the
Right.
psyche.
Well, it was even Henry Margenau himself, a very outstanding scientist, that called attention to that fact, that the psi of the physicist was the same as the psi of the psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was sitting next to him at this dinner, and I said, it's also the trident of Neptune. And he turned rather pale and said, I think I'll have to go to my room, I feel sick.
That's going too far.
Yeah, that's going too far. But he liked to push that other thing at him, but he wasn't prepared for me to push one at him. And I've tried to be more careful since that.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, he was the one that's, at another occasion where he'd lectured on probability, he wanted to make everything under probability instead of determinism.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, now, do you think there's a probability that the desk would fly out the window? And he said, very small probability, but I have to allow there is some.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, that's absurd, you see. That's using the wrong set of laws. The desk isn't going to fly out the window. If it did, I would suspect some really suspicious thing at work.
Mm-hmm.
It is, under natural law, it wouldn't.
I mean, if somebody came along with a helicopter and hooked it up to a rope, they could make it fly out the window.
Well, all right, or it'd be magic or something, but it'd be cause for special investigation, not something I'd let pass.
Not simply a question of a probability that occurred.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So these realms are distinct. And I'd like to say that the nuclear realm is never going to obey the laws of determinism.
And you seem to be suggesting that scientists are confused about this.
Well, I think they're confused because they're trying to make everything under the same principle,
Mm-hmm.
without recognizing that it's natural to cosmology to have different principles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to do something, the means that you use has to be determinate. You have to be sure the car will start, that all those things all the equipment for the TV is working, and so otherwise you can't do what you want to do unless it is determined. But that doesn't mean what you do with it has to obey laws. All around us we see nature, beautiful flowers, birds, everything springing up, creation, but it's doing so by virtue of being able to draw on certain laws of chemistry that make it possible for the plant to nourish itself. Mm-hmm. And for them, the plants to nourish us too, because we draw our energy from plant. Mm-hmm. That whole structure of creation rests on being able to use these laws. It's like a platform on which you build something. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me throw it back at you a little bit, Arthur, because isn't it the case that one of the scientific objections to astrology has been the idea that astrology, at least in some forms, has implied that human behavior is determined by the positions of the planets?
Well, that's a much larger sense than as I explained to you on a previous program. It's like a sandwich where there's determinism underneath and there's fate, if you want to call it that, on the top, but mm-hmm. the ham in the middle is what's important, and that's freedom. Mm-hmm. Now that fate thing is the other way around from determinism. It's like there being a score for the orchestra. If you're going to have different people in a universe and they're going to interact with one another, there has to be some kind of way for them for their ways to converge. Mm-hmm. And there is something in astrology that attends to that. That's not what I'm trying to talk about today, but that would be the theme. In other words, there's a convergence of factors necessary even for you to be successful as a businessman. You would have to have customers and other things that was converging on the same goal. Mm-hmm. You couldn't function all alone. Mm-hmm. Just as I couldn't go on with my helicopter models indefinitely, mm-hmm. I had to get a backer in the form of Larry Bell. And when myself and Larry Bell converged, that was what you're talking about fate. Mm-hmm. I think of it as opportunity rather than the older term fate.
But without dwelling on it too much, you seem to be suggesting that the principle of fate or opportunity is a different principle than either the deterministic ideas of science or the probabilistic ideas of science.
That fate thing is much larger than what we're talking about, these different principles. I talked about Neptune and I talked about Saturn. I didn't talk about the other planets, yeah. of which there are several others, mm-hmm. but they gradually build up to a kind of total freedom. And by the time you get to that stage of evolution, you don't need the planets anymore. You're a god and you sail around and do what you please. But even the gods have to wait for the right tides for their ships to float mm-hmm. on the terrestrial ocean. Mm-hmm. I'm using a complicated metaphor there, but you couldn't make a ship float out when the tide wasn't right, you see. Yeah. And we're having we're not supposed to talk about today, but...
it's all right.
Well, we're having a great stirring up of things. It's like before a spring planting, the earth gets plowed up, and that's what's making everyone so uncomfortable now. The earth's getting plowed up, but I think it's for a grand new planting mm-hmm. that will see a new and better world, I mm-hmm. hope.
Now, I think what you're referring to metaphorically are some of the larger cycles
right.
that astrology speaks of.
Well, that's exactly what's happening now. We're coming to a conjunction of the two outer planets. It only occurs once every 170 years. Last time was 1822, began the industrial age. So this shortly next year will begin a new age.
Mm-hmm.
That's early 93.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to cover Saturn and Neptune principally.
Yes.
There is one more planet that has a relevance to science. I mean, science as it now is. And that's the one between Uranus and Neptune, Uranus.
Between Saturn and...
Between Saturn and Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
That was the planet that was discovered at the time of the American Revolution. It was and before the French Revolution. It was when they began to recognize individual rights as against being a vassal of the king, the right of self-determination. And it seems to have nothing to do with science, you might think, but it does in the sense that it has to do with principles rather than laws.
Mm-hmm.
That's a distinction which might escape you.
The distinction between principles and laws, yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh. How would you...
Well, I'm a little shaky myself on making it clear, but the principles, the distinction would be that if I give you the laws of gravity, that the attraction of gravity varies as the inverse square of the distance, that's a principle. It doesn't tell you where the moon is or when there's going to be an eclipse. You have to go out and find out where it is now.
Mm-hmm.
That's called a boundary condition in order to predict where it will be next week or next year.
We have just a minute, Arthur, so we'll need to tie this point together quickly.
Well, Saturn is the policeman applying the principles that justice purportedly puts out in the form of laws.
Mm-hmm.
That's, is that enough?
Well, Saturn is
the combination of the principle and the application.
Mm-hmm.
Look, brother, you've been speeding, you see. That's applying the principle.
Mm-hmm.
So Saturn deals with that realm in which you have to apply the laws, which is just as true for the satellites, you see, as it is for the planets. But the scientists at home are controlling where the satellites go. They're free to make it go, but they can't violate the laws of nature.
Oh. Obviously, Arthur, I think you've raised many more issues than we're able to address in the context of this half-hour program, but I think many of our viewers who are interested in pursuing the discussion further will be interested in knowing that a continued hour going into greater depth with Arthur Young will be available as part of the Thinking Aloud Inner Work videotape series. So our time is up for now. Arthur Young, thank you so much for being with me.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us.